Hi there and welcome to Spotlight Business with me, Philip Nanfuri. I thank you for your company this fine Thursday evening. On Tuesday, there was a different program which sought to increase the awareness, I beg your pardon, on breast cancer issues within Ghana, so we couldn't come on. But we're here today, and on tonight's edition, we'll be discussing a number of issues, and I'm sure some of you may have guessed right. We'll be looking at the Finance Minister's appearance on the floor of Parliament yesterday. But on tonight's edition, we want to break it down to enable you and I understand all the economic and financial rigmarole that goes into all these appearances on the floor of Parliament. We are very familiar with him presenting the budget, but we are hearing yesterday that it wasn't really a budget. Some will call it interim budget. Some were saying expenditure in advance of appropriation. What does that mean? We will delve into all of that tonight. And the issue of our debt. Yes, but we're not going to look at the political size of debt. We're going to look at the numbers. Who are the people lending to us, particularly on the external side? With debt, we have the domestic debt, where we borrow from within the shores of Ghana, and the external debt, where we go for loans and funds beyond the shores of Ghana. Now, we want to explore it and look at the people who are most indebted to what the numbers are saying. So tonight, we're going to speak to numbers, and we're going to do that with Lartey. Now, Yao's role is very important because he comes from a very important firm within the financial services architecture. I'm sure you've heard of KPMG, PwC, and he's from Deloitte, or some of you will know it as Deloitte and Touche, one of the big four accounting firms in the world. And he's from the Ghana office. He's a financial advisory leader. So financial advisory, everything got to do with the financial services sector and how it operates within the broader economy. He's an expert and he's very astute in those issues. So we'll be delving into that tonight. We're going to make it as simple and as relatable as possible. We want to break some of these hard terms. A lot of things were flying around when the finance minister says sovereign bond, euro bond. We know it from the media, but what exactly does it mean? We'll delve in some of these things tonight. So Lartey has taken time off his busy schedule to join us on Spotlight Business. I want to say a very big thank you to him and his team for releasing him to come and join us tonight. So Uncle Yao, thank you very much for joining us.
You're most welcome.
Just before we start, I'm a very person or curious person, so I want to find out things. I saw that you've been with another accounting firm for 11 years and you are in another one, so we're talking about 12 years plus in terms of your career. Just to educate us, what pulled you to these industries or to this industry? Was it the money or it was something else?
Okay, so just to give you an idea, in accounting practice, there are about 4 big firms in the world, and then there's a fifth. We used to have a fifth that collapsed as a result of this Enron issue. Yeah. But then we are left with the big 4. Yes. So after Anderson collapsed, we only have the big 4 now, and the big 4 are Deloitte, PwC, KPMG, and EY. And so we are part of the big 4, and I have a big 4 accounting practice experience. So I started my career with the first one, EY, and then I moved to PwC, I'm now with
so should we expect you at KPMG in the so far future?
So that's a very interesting one.
Fantastic. I like that. Anyway, so for our subject tonight, we want to break down the finance minister's presentation yesterday. I want to call it a presentation. Yeah. And we have a number of themes and questions here we've laid out for Yao, so that we stick to the script and we're able to maximize time and then let you understand some of these issues. But the first question I want to ask you, what happened yesterday? Some are saying an interim budget. Some are saying a budget for 2021. Some are saying quarter 1 2021 budget. Some are saying expenditure in advance of appropriation. Which of these is it?
Okay. So let me give you the regulatory side or the legal aspect of what was done in Parliament. So by law, Article 175 or 179 of the 1992 Constitution and 180 of the 1992 Constitution requires the President to cause to be presented to Parliament every year in advance of the or the oncoming year an estimate of expenditure, revenue and expenditure for the coming year.
Okay.
Now, that article also allows the President to prepare what we call an appropriation bill. The appropriation bill is similar to what was presented to Parliament, where it shows the program of activities and the related expenditure and how government intends to finance those expenditure.
Okay.
But in addition to that, we have what we call the Public Financial Management Act.
Okay.
Section 23 of the Public Financial Management Act allows government to present what we call supplementary budget. And I think it's on the basis of that over the last few months, you realize that we've presented several supplementary budgets managing the COVID situation. So the supplementary budget, as was presented yesterday, is just a portion of what the law or the Constitution wants us to do. The Constitution requires us to do an annual, but then you can do a supplementary budget where situations requires that you do part of it. So it's a 3-month forward-looking budget, and it allows government to assess, and then as you get into the full year, government can present a full year budget.
So somebody was asking that it's mainly because we have an election. That's why we have this. Is that the case, or because it seems like what the narrative is that every election year this is what happens, because on a regular year we'll have the finance minister come in November to present his budget ahead of next year. Is it?
I think if you look at it historically, and it started emphatically from when Honorable Banredu was finance minister, and he thought that we have to do what we call a zero-based budget system. You can't get into the financial year when you have not budgeted for expenditure, you are spending. So he thought that we have to present the budget several months before we get into the year. So he started this and he emphatically enforced that. But then, given the situation that we find ourselves, we've had several supplementary budgets. So I think that it's an election year, yes, but then government, given the situation that is going on, government wants to also make a point that we are recovering from the COVID pandemic. And as you go into the details, you realize that government also wants to make a point about the recovery. So beyond the elections, governments also want to indicate that we are recovering, and then what measures is putting in place to help us recover.
The finance minister indicated the amount per the document they released from the Ministry of Finance, and they were looking at 27.4 billion Ghana cedis. Now, to the uninitiated, one might assume that that's a lot of money just for 3 months. In your estimation, I know you've tracked budgets over time, broken them down into quarters to look at them. What do you make of, just generally speaking, 27.4 billion for Q1? Is that enough? Is that okay? We'll delve into the numbers again, but just your thoughts. Is that okay? Is that enough for us?
I think it's a significant sum if you look at the entire projected revenue for the year. So the projected revenue for the year is 66 billion. So if government is asking for 27 billion for 1 quarter, then you can imagine the proportion of the revenue that's going off. So it's almost like 2/3 or let's say 1/3 thereabout of the entire revenue, or even more than that. So if you balancing it off against what government is expecting in terms of revenue, then that's a significant amount. But you also notice that the expenditure is not evenly distributed. So it's not a symmetrical case where you say 12 months and you spend 1/12 of the amount. In some particular quarters, the expenditure is higher. So you have some spikes in expenditure, particularly for the last quarter of the year, which we are getting into. And then as we recover from the pandemic, the first quarter of the year, we also expect to spend more. So the expenditure or the ask is more, but it's the exigency of the situation or where you find ourselves today. That's why the expenditure.
I like that. I like the way he has explained it, that every quarter may necessitate different demands. Just like I'm sure in your life, there are some months that you may spend more than you would in other months. We have the video of the finance minister speaking on the floor of Parliament. Let's take a look at that and then continue our conversation.
Will require an amount of 27.4 billion to carry on the services of government until the expiration of 3 months from the beginning of the 2021 financial year. The total amount is to cover government operations such as compensation of employees, ex gratia awards, interest and amortization, transfer to statutory funds, critical programs and goods and services, and capex allocations of MDAs. Mr. Speaker, the details of the expenditure are as follows: compensation of employees, 7.7 billion Ghana cedis, use of goods and services, 1.6 billion Ghana cedis, interest payments, 7 billion Ghana cedis, subsidies, 259 million Ghana cedis, grants to other government units, 4.3 billion Ghana cedis, social benefits, 41 million Ghana cedis, other expenditure, 813 million Ghana cedis, capex, 1.9 billion Ghana cedis, making a total expenditure of 23.665 billion Ghana cedis. Arrears clearance of 350 million Ghana cedis, amortization of 3.42 billion Ghana cedis. Total appropriation, Mr. Speaker, 27,434,180,520 Ghana cedis.
So that was the Honourable Minister of Finance, Mr. Ken Ofriatta, on the floor of Parliament yesterday. And this specific excerpt or this specific video deals with a breakdown, which we are going to go into detail on. Now, I'm just going to read it to you, and Yao and I are going to explain the respective things. On the expenditure side, we have one, compensation of employees. So government has categorized all its expenditure to make things simple for itself and for us also to follow. So we refer to them as line items. 1, compensation of employees. 2, use of goods and services. 3, interest payments. 4, subsidies. 5, grants to other government units. 6, social benefits. 7, other expenditure. 8, capital expenditure. Then it gives you as total expenditure. Then it goes on to number 9, arrears clearance. Then number 10, amortization. Then it says appropriation, which means the money being granted to be spent. It gives the total. Now, in terms of definition of these terms, some of them are very easy to understand. Compensation of employees, use of goods and services. One would assume these are things within the government machinery, what makes them function. Yeah. Let's say stationery, office equipment, stuff like that. Interest payments, yes, we are very familiar with that. Subsidies, very important. Grants to other government units. Can we talk about the departments and agencies of the ministries? Is that what we're looking at?
Yes. So what government allocates even to the local authorities.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then social benefits, that's...
Yeah, some of which is the COVID relief we are getting from electricity relief and stuff like that.
Then other expenditure. They didn't really state what the other expenditure is. Do we have any idea what other expenditure means?
Yeah. So what comes with the other expenditure is ESLA transfer, COVID-related expenditure again.
That's fine.
Those ones
and then capital expenditure, that's the capex, the goods where we see, or the...
Capital, physical, tangible assets. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Then total expenditure. Arrears clearance means things that governments haven't paid for in the past, and they need to pay for.
So those is amount you owe to contractors.
Okay, that's part of it. 350 million, that's a lot of money. Yeah. Then amortization, which is essentially...
debt-related expenditure.
Okay. How is that different from interest payments?
Yes. So in managing your debt, what you do is you build a fund, what we call sinking fund, in order to be able to pay off your debt. Okay. So in all of these things that, or the expenditure items that were listed, if you put them in order of, let's say, by value, so the most significant that we have is compensation payments, making about 28%, followed by interest payments, making about 26%. Now, if you pick that interest payment and you add that to the, let's say, amortization, the total debt-related expenditure about 38%. So out of all this 27 billion, about 40% is going to debt-related expenditure. So the amortization payment is just clearing or paying off debt.
Paying off debt.
That are...
Okay. So this raises a very interesting question. Yeah. Compensation of employees. I mean, we don't want to play with our pay. That's something that's, as a people in Ghana, I think all over the world, we don't play with it. But we're doing 7 billion on that. Interest payments, we're doing another 7 million. Okay, compensation, we're doing 7.7. Interest payments, we're doing 7.
7, yeah.
And capital expenditure, one may argue, we're doing 1.9. So we're paying people more, and we're paying more on our debts than we are doing with physical and tangible assets. How then do we explain this to the layman? Some may look at it and say, this seems very funny. How can we rationalize the numbers? I think that's the question I want to ask.
Yeah. So I think it's a very good question and a valid one. You notice that a lot of the investors we speak to are very worried about that. Because if you go to countries that have taken advantage of their natural resources, like Rwanda and Angola, that are using oil, they spend about 30% of their total budget allocation on capital expenditure. We spend roughly 10 to 11%. This represents 7% of the total 27 billion capital expenditure. That means our expenditure on recurrent activities, things that we are eating or consuming in the short term, are more than the money that we are spending in things that are tangible. The problem we are going to have is that going forward, it will take us back to the age-old question of debt sustainability and debt to GDP ratio.
Because I was coming to that question. Sorry to
Yes.
cut you. So it means that if we are spending this on capital expenditure, then if we need to augment in terms of spending on capital expenditure, we have to borrow.
Certainly.
That's the reality.
Because the point is, a lot of the money that should have gone into capital expenditure is going into compensation and other recurrent expenditure. So if you need road, you declare it as a year of road. How are you going to finance it? When you have only allocated 10% of your total budget to roads, then you have to finance from somewhere else.
From finance from somewhere else. And I think the other thing that we would come to an elaboration of the debt issues in the second part of our discussion. But when somebody looks at this, and I was just talking to a friend of mine who has an interest in these issues but didn't read accounts of finance in school, and he says he's looked at our budgets over time, and this has been the more or less the flow for quite some time. And he asked him the question that do we ever come out of a situation where we'll get to a point that we'll be using more of our revenues on capital expenditure and we'll start cutting down on the compensation of employees without necessarily clearing people out of the public sector? How do we get to a point where we ensure that we have more, for lack of a better word, clean figures around some of these things?
I think that was the purpose of some of the World Bank funded programs that we've pursued in the past. So, you know, historically, we had a ministry called Public Sector Reform, and it was headed by Dr. Indum. The idea behind that was to rationalize the employees in the public sector such that we are getting value from all employees in the public sector. Because if you have employees that we are not getting a lot of value from, then you have this situation because you are paying compensation, but you are not getting enough return in terms of productivity. Because if all the employees employed today are productive, you wouldn't have the problem that you have. And if you look at advanced economies, you would think that those countries are debt distressed. So if you go to Japan, their debt to GDP ratio is so high. But the thing is, they have other tangible factors that are supporting or able to absorb the shocks from that. But ours, the challenge we have is that we are spending a lot of recurrent expenditure. So in a long term, we are going to have this situation unless there's a radical change to do a restructuring of the entire public sector, the entire compensation of employees. And I think it started with this Fair Wages Commission coming into, but I guess we have to...
Is it a single spine issue?
Single spine thing. We have to strictly enforce it because it's not something you do overnight. You would have to start from getting people into the, let's say, pay net or the salary structure. The people that we are getting into, we should know that there is demand for it and there's going to be productive effects of bringing one person into the public sector. As people retire, we should do a rationalization of all employees. That if you go to Ministry of Communications or Ministry of Education, every employee is productive for the period that the person is there. So if it's 9 to 5, the person is fully occupied. So there's no point where the person is walking around and doing nothing. If you do that assessment, you realize that over time, all the employees that we have in the public sector are productive employees. And so you wouldn't have people who you are not getting much from.
I know management of an economy is not an easy thing. Some would describe it as a Herculean task. I mean, to have to make decisions of such a nature, cut back here, spend more there, it's not an easy one. And I think all things being equal, our government has made some strides in the few years they've been in solving some of these issues. But from your perspective, having a broad picture, do you think there's light at the end of the tunnel in the way we are going to restructure our expenditure and our revenue mobilization? Is there some positive light for us in terms of, it may be I'm putting you in a spot, but to somebody who's watching us, may not really understand and may think that this may be it forever. Is there some light at the end of the tunnel?
That takes me to an interesting post I saw on WhatsApp, I think last night or so, that sorry, there's doomsday at the other side, so the light at the end of the tunnel is off. So the light at the end of the tunnel is off. So is it the case that there's doomsday at the other side that for us who in the other part of the world, the light at the end of the tunnel never shows up? So I think it's a structural thing that we do over time.
Okay.
And this morning I was thinking through how countries like Korea and China came out of this. There was a strategic policy decision. Let's control our population. 1 child per family. And it's something that you have to, it's a pill that you bite or you swallow, and you enforce it on the people to see that change. And so if you have someone or a strong leadership, strong government that's ready to take the major political decisions, I think we can come out of this. Okay. You've seen that happening in Rwanda. You've seen that happening in other economies. So if you are going to take very decisive policy decisions and strictly enforce them, I think we can come out of this.
Yeah. Okay. I want us to move on to revenue. We've looked at expenditure. We've broken down some of the items. I hope you are following back at home. Sometimes there's a lot when you have to absorb some of these issues, but I think it's important for everybody to learn how our government functions, so that when there's a lot of noise in the air, you listen attentively and you're able to discern and decipher what is important. We'll talk about revenue, and I think from what we gather from the finance minister's presentation, they're looking to raise 13.3 billion for the Q1. Now, for the breakdown of revenues, I see total revenue and grants broadly. I see domestic revenue. I see tax revenue. Then I see taxes on income and property. I see taxes on domestic goods and services, international trade taxes, tax refunds, social contributions, non-tax revenue, other revenue, and then it gives us grants. And I see grants, program grants, I see 0 for the first quarter.
Yeah.
Project grants, I see 187 million proposed for the year. Someone said we've reached a point, okay, in our economic life where we are now lower middle income, so therefore these soft loans and things we're getting, it's not really going to cushion us anymore. But when you look at the revenue generation side, Uncle Yao, what strikes you in there? Domestic revenue, we're going to do about 10.4 billion. Where do you think may change in the coming year to provide some room? Because as I understand it, maybe in some quarters, government may program to collect this amount, but there may be some positive wins in there.
Yeah.
From the revenue generation, do you see any positive wins hitting us in the next quarter?
Okay. So I think it would be very good to put this in context.
Okay.
When we were hit by the pandemic, we had a revenue shortfall, or we were looking at a revenue shortfall of 13 billion, or 13.6 billion. And the 13.6 billion was coming from 3 main sources. So the first one is revenue shortfall from petroleum receipts. Okay. So as a result of the pandemic, oil prices that we had estimated about $56 per barrel went all the way to below $1. So petroleum receipts were about 5.3 billion was lost. And then we had income or losses from exports and non-oil tax revenue. That was also about 5.3 billion. And then non-tax revenue was another 3.6 billion. So if you add all of that, there was about 13.6 billion. That was loss of revenue. Now,
that's a lot of money.
That's a lot. That's a lot of money. So if you add that to COVID-related expenditure of 11.6 billion, we had a total of 25 billion shortfall in revenue and then overspend. That was not budgeted for. So this 27 billion, I mean, we have suffered almost close to that as a result of COVID. Now, government believes that we are recovering from COVID. So people are still importing, and people who ordered for vehicles prior to COVID period and others are supposed to clear and are going to clear those goods. So then you're going to have a lot from import duties. You're going to have a lot from property taxes. And it's one of the areas that in our last budget review as Deloitte, we mentioned to government that government is not doing very well with property taxes. There are people who are living in luxurious homes and luxurious communities who have never in their lives. I know someone who has walked to a revenue office and say, take my property taxes, and nobody was prepared to take it because there's nothing in there for the person to record property taxes. That's a problem. And I guess the reason why we have programs like NACOP is to help us identify properties, classify them, and tax them. So government should enforce this strictly, because now a lot of businesses are now recovering from the pandemic. So corporate taxes might not be a very good area to go to, but the properties are there. So you can still go after the properties and then tax them. So domestic revenue from import duties, from property taxes and stuff like that should be a key area the government should focus on and do a lot.
Okay. I mean, so we've looked at expenditure, we've looked at revenue. Yao has taken us through the various line items. He's broken them down. He's explained what each does and the numbers around these things. All these things are numbers. And I always say that sometimes let's forget the noise. Let's pay attention. Come to MX24 and then we'll take you through some of these things. We want to move into another part of our conversation, and that deals with our debt market. Now we're going to focus on external debt only. That's borrowing from outside Ghana. We will not focus on domestic debt for now. At another opportunity, another discussion, we'll look at that. But before we delve into the discussion, let's take a video from the Honorable Minister of Finance again.
Mr. Speaker, for the purposes of the 2021 expenditure in advance of appropriation, we projected the 2021 first quarter total revenue and grants of 13.3 billion, while total expenditures, including the clearance of arrears, is projected at 24 billion. The results in the projected fiscal deficit of 10.7 billion for the period. Mr. Speaker, to support the 2021 budget and liability management, we plan to source funding from the international capital markets. This will comprise the issuance of sovereign bonds of US 3 billion, with the option to increase it to 5 billion should market conditions prove favorable. Out of the amount to be raised, 1.5 billion will be used to support the 2021 budget and 3.5 billion for liability management.
So that was the Honorable Minister of Finance, Mr. Nanfuri, speaking again on the floor of Parliament yesterday. And on this except he was talking about government's desire or plan to borrow from the international capital markets and to support the budget and for liability management. Yeah, I'm sure you know the first question I'm going to ask. We understand what he means by to support the budget. When they say liability management, what are we looking at? What are we talking about?
So, if you recall, the last Eurobond that was issued, a significant portion of the money was used to pay off what we call termination or capacity payment from unused power purchase agreement that we have signed on to. The problem we've had over the years is that we've signed on to take-or-pay contracts. Take-or-pay contracts means that you can bring a plant like a Mary, car power, ship. If it's there, it's ready to supply the power. But if you don't need the power, you still pay
for it,
for the plants being there. So if you sign such contracts, they are, in legal terms, onerous provisions. They are things that will hang around your neck for the 25 years or 20 years that you have that contract signed. So government thought it wise that if you don't need this power, the one way to do it is terminate the agreement, pay off any liability, and then free off yourself. So one of the ways that government, or one of the use of the bond, was to pay off these contracts or termination agreements. So government did that. You know that there are some other liabilities like amounts you owe to contractors and so on and so forth. And going into election, we are going to have a lot more of that getting into next year. So these liability payments, liability management, is just how much government owes to third parties, and then how much money is government going to raise to pay off these liabilities.
Okay. And he mentioned in there that, I beg your pardon, yes, I have it. This will comprise the issuance of sovereign bonds of 3 billion with the option to increase to 5 billion should market conditions prove favorable. To the ordinary man, market conditions will mean more or less the temperature of the room where you are going to borrow from. If we get there and then people are cold, nobody's going to give us a good rate. If we get there and people are warm and receptive, they give us a good rate. What, in your estimation, will influence market conditions? Because I'm sure you're well aware, we are seeing a respike, if I can use that word, of COVID cases in the European markets. We are seeing what's happening in the US as they are also entering their own election. So somebody may say, yes, it's early days yet, but we may not see any light on the horizon. What do we mean by favorable market conditions, and can we indeed get those conditions?
Okay. So I think the very good point that you've raised, the first one is the second wave of the COVID and whether or not it's going to have other ramifications as we've had in the first instance that we had. So if Europe and other developed economies do not overcome the COVID situation in the next 3 to 4 months, then market conditions will not be as favorable or as you want to raise a bond. And mind you, before you raise a bond, you go on investor roadshow. The investor roadshow allows the investors to assess the risk appetite of the countries that they are investing in. And so a very good example of unfavorable market condition is what we had in 2015. So in 2015, that was when we had the challenges where we had the Senche and all.
Yeah.
Government went on the international market to raise, to do an Eurobond. And at the roadshow, we came back empty because market conditions were not good. They were not good because, one, government was asking for a coupon rate of 9.5%, but investors were asking for 11.5%. The last bond that was issued, the long-dated bond, was around 8.8%. So if today you go to market and the investors are asking for anything above that, when the last issuance that you had for the long-dated 40-year bond, you had 8.8%. But if you go for a 15-year bond and they are asking for 9%, 10%, the market conditions are not good.
Okay.
That means that they see you as a high-risk country, and if they have to invest, they will ask for more. The other thing is when the economic fundamentals are also not very strong. So if you have your economic fundamentals not very strong, investors who are investing in those countries will ask for a higher return on their investments. So first, we fix our macroeconomic fundamentals and make sure they are very strong before you go to market. And then by the time you go to market, there's strong demand to invest in countries like ours. If there's that strong demand to invest in countries like ours, we will get a coupon rate that is something that we can accommodate over the long time. Because if your coupon rate is beyond a certain limit, it will be like an albatross around your neck, because then you have to borrow again to refinance that facility.
And then that will also feed into our interest payments.
Your interest payments.
Fantastic. This is Spotlight Business. My guest, Mr. Lartey, myself, Philip Nanfuri. When we come back, we'll give you a breakdown of some of these numbers and the principal and interest payments we make on some of the Eurobonds we go for. I beg your pardon, some of the debts we go for internationally. Let's take a quick break. We'll be right back.
Angelina, you be cool in my temperature. If you call,
say cheese, take a picture. Shaka post, make I see, take a picture.
in the leg book, boah.
Where the party day today? Hey mama, hey I ever say. Secure.
No, this is not business as usual. This is a different kind of business. From the global stock market, to our central bank, to insights on insurance and investment, Spotlight is the show for you. Here, we look beyond the numbers. On Spotlight, we'll tell you the complexity behind the figures. On Spotlight, we examine hardcore financial issues. Join me, Philip Nanfuri, on MX24, together with policymakers and experts as we talk business. Hi there, you're welcome back from the break. This is Spotlight Business with me, Philip Nanfuri. My guest, Yao Apia Lartey. He's a financial advisory leader at Deloitte and Touche. They're one of the big 4 accounting firms in the country. Just because he's here, I'll not mention the other 3 again. So Deloitte and Touche is on the chopping board tonight. We're going to delve into our external debt stock. And straight off the bat, we'll start with the total debt stock, external. This is only what we've gone for externally. We're not looking at a total debt stock or domestic, just external, what we are going from beyond the shores of Ghana. And the figure there is 24.05, I think, 24.035 billion. So let's make it 24 to make things simple. And this is data we extracted from Bank of Ghana's quarterly bulletin. So this is data from the regulator. They collate all types of data. And according to the report, it went up 16.8% from last year. So a year-on-year mapping of it, you realize that from last quarter 2 2019 to this quarter 2020, our external debt has gone up 16.8%. Now, I'm coming to Yao. The reasons that were advanced in the bulletin was 1, net transactions, into bracket disbursements and amortizations, the Eurobond and the 1 billion rapid credit facility from the IMF. When we say net transactions, disbursements and amortization, I know you've explained amortizations, but in this context of paying loans beyond the shores of Ghana, what do they mean by that?
So I think in simple terms, when you are netting off, there will be instances where there is a receipt or amount that is due you.
Okay.
So you net it off against an amount that you also due to pay off to third parties or external agencies that we owe. So then the net effect ultimately will lead to us paying some money. Okay. So then the net is what has been reported.
Put there. And then they also put in the Eurobond and then the 1 billion rapid credit facility. But yeah, one may ask, yes, these debts are, I mean, we need them for various reasons. At the same time, somebody argues that he always hears that when we get these inflows, they help the city stability. So why is there always a negative fuss about us going or us increasing our external debt?
Well, I think in principle, borrowing, like any businessman or woman will say, it's not a bad thing. It's what you use the money for. The money should be used in something that can pay for itself. So if you borrow to feed ourselves or you borrow for recurrent expenditure, then we are not using the money well, or we are not using it appropriately. So over the years, we have been borrowing. But then the question you ask yourself is, where is this money going into? If the money is going into tangible assets or things or projects that can self-finance, then we should be out of the woods a long time ago. But we are still where we are, or we are still borrowing, and yet we are not coming out of it. That's because when we borrow, we are not putting them in tangible assets that's helping us come out of it. So that's the challenge we've had over the years.
Okay. And we're going on to the next part that looks at the types of debtors or types of creditors, I beg your pardon. So those who are giving us the money are creditors. We are debtors to them. Now, I'm going to split it up for us, for all of us to understand. We have the multilateral lenders, and when we talk about multilateral, we talk about things like the World Bank, the IMF, the African Development Bank, or maybe the Inter-American Bank or the Asian Development Bank whatsoever. And then if you look at a bilateral lender, we're looking at country-to-country lending. If you look at commercial creditors, we're looking at maybe a Standard Chartered or an HSBC or a Credit Suisse. They are banks operating across the world. JP Morgan, your Goldman Sachs, they are commercial creditors if we're going to borrow from them or if they were lending us funds. Then we have concessional loans and then export credit agencies. Somebody described them. I'm sure Yao will correct me if I'm wrong. The EXIMs and all those guarantee things that have a lot of inflow of foreign currency because of the facilitation of trade and other activities. Then we also have what we've recently, since 2007, become accustomed to when we issued our first Eurobond in 2007. The international capital markets. That's where we go for the Eurobonds from. So if we have that infograph there, I want us to display it for our viewers and to see. So if you look on the left-hand side, you see the creditor type. Then you see the stock building over time each quarter. And yeah, the question I want to ask here is, what do you see when you look at our relationship with these multilateral, bilateral, commercial creditors in the international capital markets? It's very obvious here, but I want it to come from you. What do we see from the data?
Yeah, so I think it's a trend that it's gradually changing over the years. So in the last 2 or 3 decades, we had a lot of exposure to concessionary facilities and concessionary loans.
So that's money that was soft in its...
That was soft.
Okay.
So concessionary facilities are given to poor countries, lower middle countries, and so on and so forth.
Okay.
We have gone out of that, so we do not have concessionary facilities. So you realize that the percentage or the split is very low for concessionary facilities.
Okay.
And we used to get a lot of grants. We are also not getting a lot of grants because what the international community or lending community thinks is that we are old enough to win ourselves.
Okay.
So they've win us off these concessionary facilities. Now we are going more into commercial borrowing, which is the money we borrow from the international market. So when we go out there borrowing from doing the Eurobond, we are borrowing from the international commercial market. Those are relatively more expensive than what you get from a bilateral agreement or what you get from multilaterals.
Okay.
So bilateral agreements, we run through agencies. So let's say we have an agreement with Japan, and through JICA, we get that facility. We have an agreement with Korea, and through a Korean Exim Bank, we get that facility. And then you have the multilaterals where we go straight to Africa Development Bank. So let's see, the Pokwasi interchange, for instance, is being sponsored by Africa Development Bank. So that is something that it will be added to our debt. But it's being used for a development or infrastructure projects. So if all these multilateral borrowings are used for projects such as that, then over time, the value of our tangible assets increases, so you will not even see the effects on our GDP, or you not see the adverse effect. So that's what's happened over the years. So we are moved away from concessional.
I will ask you a layman's question here. We are moving away from concessional borrowing, yeah. But however, when you look at the data, it has multilateral debt is about 32.5% of our external debt. Bilateral debt is quite small, 5%. The commercial credit is 8.9%. And the international capital markets, 42.6%. Now, with the multilateral debt having its soft terms, why don't we rather structure ourselves towards that side? Even though we are winning ourselves off, I'm sure there will be some room. And even with the commercial creditors, borrowing from an international bank may sound far better than going to the market where somebody may describe them as they are looking for their profits, they're looking for their returns, so they don't really care about. And recently, I'm sure you're familiar with the Zambian story, what's going on in Zambia, where they are almost defaulting on their debt and having to renegotiate their debt. These international capital markets, they don't care about you. Why don't we move into the easier areas for where we are as an economy?
Yeah, so to the extent that the projects that we present to these institutions qualify for lending, because they have a criteria, they have benchmark. And so countries have been classified or categorized into certain categories. So based on that category, if you qualify, you will be advanced your facility. So some of the things that we've gone to the international market to borrow, if you go to the World Bank or any multilateral institution, you may not get the money for that purpose. So you will not get the money to come and pay or terminate a contract, for instance, from a multilateral agency. But you could go to the capital market to borrow to do that. So the capital market gives us a lot of flexibility in terms of use of funds, but it's relatively expensive. So you can have your money, use it for whatever you want to use it for, but then you pay more for that. And also to add to that, a lot of these multilateral debts have stayed with us for a long time because they are long-dated borrowings or lendings that were given to us. So you can have a facility that was given to us like 50 years ago and we are still paying. You can have facility that has been given to us for the next 40 years and we are still paying. For our international markets, the longest you have seen, you see 40, but sometimes Euro bonds are 10, 15, but you have multilateral credit that give you for about 40 years. So for a long time, you see that figure there. That's for so many years, that figure is still there. We are paying it over time.
And you see, looking at the data again from Bank of Ghana, the quarterly bulletin Q2 2020, I look at and for our viewers, Bank of Ghana categorized the data in a way that you can find out how much each creditor we are paying to in terms of principal and then the interest payments. Now look at the multilateral, for example. Yeah, on principal, as at Q2 2020, we were paying 27.24 million. For the interest, we were doing 14.87. By bilateral, we're doing about 34 million. For interest, we're doing about 7.63. Then let me come to commercial. For principal, we're doing about 252 million, and interest, we're doing about 42. Then, international capital markets, obviously, most of our bonds are bullet bonds where at the end we pay everything. But for the repayments, we're doing about 211 million. So I'm seeing 27 million for interest expenses, 14, and 211. Obviously, it makes sense to go for the cheaper option. But you just explain to us why it's so. And just for our viewers and listeners to understand that these are some of the reasons why we are going to the national capital markets. It gives us flexibility. It gives us room to do our own things. But yeah, in the grand scheme of things, when you look at our external debt, somebody may also talk about the fact that if our city depreciates, it affects the external debt component. In the grand scheme of things, as somebody who's been in the financial services space, you've monitored economic happenings, what's your idea of our external debt and where we are heading to as an economy?
Okay, so I'll give you a picture of, so it also helps viewers to get a picture of where we are currently. So as of July, the IMF did a report on us. And so that's where the IMF mentioned for the first time that we are 76% of GDP in terms of debt to GDP. Now, within that, they mentioned that our external debt is 24.3 billion, as you've mentioned, dollars. That's about 138 billion Ghana cedis. And that accounts for about 52% of our total debt.
So it means that the external debt is even more than
it's more than domestic. It's more than domestic. So domestic is about 47.5, and then the 0.5% is on account of what we are borrowing for the financial sector. So the financial sector borrowing alone is about 0.5%. So domestic is about 47.5% of the total debt that we have. Okay. So within our international debt is what you've classified here. Now, our external debt, the challenge we have there beyond the interest payment is the rate of depreciation of the local currency. So government revenue, as we are seeing here, some of them are denominated in the local currency, unless we are selling cocoa, gold, and that's when we get forex. But some of our local revenue that we get are denominated. So if you have loans that you are servicing in foreign currency and your local currency is depreciating, you have the adverse consequences of having forex exposure in addition to interest element. So the good thing that helps us when we do the Euro bond raise is that we have forex coming in, and when there's supply, you have the price going down, which means our cedi becomes stronger, and we are able to service our debts, whether in foreign currency or local currency.
Okay, I think that's fine. I think just to add, some time ago, I think I was looking at the Finance Ministry's medium-term debt management strategy, and I think they outlined a lot of good things in there in terms of weaning us off certain exposures to certain, because I think we are highly exposed to the US dollar in terms of our borrowings than any other currency in there. I think for the debt discussion, we can go on and on. But as we draw down the curtain on our discussion, I mean, we've just segmented a part of what the finance minister presented yesterday. A lot of things went in there. He was touting government's ambition, government's accomplishments, I beg your pardon, since time. We looked at some of the programs and then what they've spent on. But for you, going forward, I mean, and again, it was contained in there that our economy is more or less growing at a faster rate than we earlier anticipated on the back of this COVID. Going forward, what do you think we should look out for? What are the areas of growth that you project will be coming in the next year, where the economy will be moving up from? Do you expect a dip, in your own opinion? Because I think the IMF projection for this year is 0.9, and for next year they're doing a 4.7, but government itself is doing more than what the IMF is projecting.
5.7.
Yes. So what are some of your thoughts on this?
I think you realize that even for other analysts, like the Economic Intelligence Unit, they are projecting a recession of our economy, while the government is projecting 1.9% growth positive. The Economic Intelligence Unit is projecting negative 1.3, a recession or contraction of 1.3. And they are expecting us to recover at 1.8% next year. So there are some speculation around there, and then there's some skepticism around our recovery. But I think that said, the fundamentals are there, some indicators are there that we are recovering. I think one area that I noticed was conspicuously missing from this budget is the advantage that we seek to take out of AFTA, Africa Continental Free Trade. It's taking off in January, and we are supposed to benefit from that because we have the secretariats here. If we do not support our industries to take advantage of that, major economies within the African region will benefit from us, and it will come at our expense. The reason why you have problems with this multilateral trade, and Brexit is a very good example, is that it works to the advantage of parties or countries that take advantage of the agreement. And one way that you can take advantage of is volumes or your price. By way of volume, you support your industries to produce more. The Nigerian market is a bigger economy. We should not even look outside Africa. The Nigerian market alone, we can make a lot of money from Ghana here just supplying to the Nigerian market because there will be no restriction. So if we support our industries to produce more in terms of volumes, they will benefit. The second thing is the price. If the price at which they are selling their product is not competitive, the African will still buy Chinese products. He will not buy the product because it's coming from an African country. He will buy it because he can afford it.
Yeah.
So one of the ways that you benefit from these trade agreements is that you sell at competitive prices. So in Europe, you realize that all the products are the same, they are of the same quality, so you can move it from, let's say, Germany to Italy, and then they are all buying the European product. But if it goes there and it's not of quality, people will not buy. And also, if the price on it is not competitive, nobody will buy. So I think that's one area that governments should focus on or support. And then sectors that are recovering or that are supposed to benefit from the COVID, for instance, the extractive industry, mines, for example. Gold price has stayed at more than $1,900 per ounce for a long time during this COVID period because investors have seen saving in metals to be the safest investment as opposed to the stock market, because the stock market is not reliable at this point, and investing in a business is also not reliable. But gold is a tangible asset that you can save for a long time. So are we supporting mining businesses to be able to produce more? Are we taking advantage of that? And then the good thing is that because oil prices have fallen, oil is a key component of mining production. So if their cost has fallen, they will be able to produce more for cheaper.
That makes sense.
So if you are not taking advantage of that to produce more, particularly in the mining sector, then you won't benefit from that. And also there's key sectors that are also benefiting from the COVID, ICT, agriculture, and others. We should target those sectors, give them the right incentives, and for them to produce more. And I didn't see that in the budget. I think that that's one of the areas that government makes sense.
So AFCFTA, and then I like the nexus between the oil industry and the mining industry. I think it's a very good one. You have just shown us that indeed. Yeah, Deloitte. So just as we wrap up on the conversation, I think we have about a minute or two to go. Speaking to our viewers, as somebody from Deloitte, very important firm in the financial services architecture in Ghana, what do you have to tell our viewers and listeners, those who are watching back at home, wherever they may be? Any key thing that you want them to keep in mind concerning the economy, concerning your business, or concerning the financial services sector?
Okay. So I think the good thing we are seeing is the positive indicators that we are having in our part of the economy. And we are blessed with the fact that the COVID has not really had a strong impact on us. Africa generally, we've survived it. I think what we should take advantage of is the fact that we have, let's say, a very peaceful country, and as we get into elections, we should keep the peace. Because of what happened in Lagos a few days ago, the messages that we are getting from investors are not very good. Even the whole region, not just Lagos, but the whole region. So if we do not manage the peace that we have now, it will send the wrong signals.
And then feed into our economics.
Feed into our economics here. Because you will never see the economic impact of it until you go through it. If you go through it, all the investors that had planned to invest in Nigeria and all of them are back in that. They have adopted a wait and see attitude. We do not want that to happen. I mean, if you talk to one or two investors in Ghana, they will always get through it. They go through election peacefully, and they've done this so many times. So we have confidence that they will go through it. Fantastic. So I think we should all focus and then do that.
Fantastic. So that's my guest, Mr. Yao Apia Lartey. He's a financial advisory leader at Deloitte & Touche, one of the big 4 accounting and auditing firms in the country. Maybe next time we'll bring them in to discuss who audits the auditor and subject them to some of the issues that have gone on in the past and pick their brain on it. But I think largely it's been a very good conversation. He's more or less explained and we've broken down what we sought to achieve, the explanation of some of these issues for you to discern yourself. There's always data available from the Ministry of Finance website. You can go on there. These are public documents available to all of us. You can go to the Bank of Ghana's website. Alternatively, if you want macroeconomic data on all these numbers and stuff like that. So I want to say a very big thank you for taking time to watch us, and those of you who share feedback privately to me, I'm very grateful to all of you. Those of you who help in bringing this show always Tuesdays and Thursdays, I say a very, very big thank you. Once again to the gentlemen at Deloitte and to Mr. Yao Apia Lartey especially. Myself, Philip Nanfuri, this has been Spotlight Business. I want to say a very, very big thank you. Have yourself a good night and a great weekend. Bye.
What's up, GH? Welcome to MX Beats, your official entertainment and lifestyle home. And every single week, we're bringing you your favorite artists.
Say cheese, take a picture. Shag a post, make a see, take a picture.
Indeed, we also bring you exclusives in music videos, interviews. Honestly, we have got you covered right here on MX Beats.
On this show, we help net new talent, write the right mix of music to boost your energy.
Big man, big things, yeah. Tim, still shoes, big things, yeah. You figure say we they come joke me as I they come, my mind was plenty.
My name is Jason Elaine.
My name is Miss Drew.
The
My name is
universe.
DJ Varosky, and I'm here to give you the best of music.